Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, hey, maybe even good evening for some of you hardworking folks out there. Not that the morning and afternoon people aren't hardworking. It's so good to have everybody on today. This is the voice of Don McCastro from CMSWire joining with WorkGrid today for webinar predictions on the future of work. What will this new decade bring? That's right, we're in the 2020s. Can you believe it? A few weeks in, and we're already making predictions. I'll tell you, it's going to be a fun decade for sure. So happy to be on the call with everybody today. So this is what things will look like. It's our introductions right now. You know, maybe not even 5 minutes, just a few minutes to do some housekeeping, tell you about our speakers, which you'll hear a little bit more about, our panelists in just a few moments. Our presentation is really the meat of the show. We're going to get into a big Q&A, just to ask our panelists their thoughts on this decade and the future of work. We have 6 questions. And for all of them, it's going to be great. And then speaking of questions, we have a live Q&A. That's right, for you, the listener of the webinar. So we're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes down the stretch at the end. You know what? You can ask a question right now. We're not going to get to it right away, but go ahead, and if you have a burning question on your mind, put it right in that Q&A module, bottom left of the browser, and we'll get to it at the end. See those colorful widgets there at the bottom? They have additional resources, including any technical support you might need today. Knock on wood for that one. All right, there we are, the host of the webinar today, working with our sponsor, WorkGrid. We, CMSWire, founded in 2003. Man, this is 1, 2, 3. This is our 3rd decade in existence, covering those 3 primary topic areas. Of course, digital workplace, which is right on target for today. And WorkGrid, www.workgrid.com. You can find out all you need to know about these guys there. They're empowering employees with their intelligent digital experience offerings for getting work done. They get a WorkGrid digital assistant. It integrates across the common systems and tools found in the workplace. Basically, the goal is to surface personalized and contextual information for each employee. Who doesn't want that in a modern, unified experience? So check those guys out, workgrid.com. And the faces behind all of the voices you will be hearing today. Once more, that's me, the moderator on top, the smaller headshot, because that's good, because I'm not the star of the show. The people below me are the stars of the show. First up, we got Sharon O'Dea. She's the co-founder of Lithos Partners. Joining her is John Ingham, people and organization strategy consultant. I've had the pleasure of interviewing both of these folks as a reporter for CMSWire. And I've also had the pleasure of following the technology developments of WorkGrid, and those are the 2 WorkGrid folks on the call today, colleagues, Brett Caldon, co-founder and CEO, and Gillian McCann, co-founder, head of cloud engineering and AI for WorkGrid. So happy to be with this all-star cast today. All right, wasting no time. Let's get right into the questions. First one, what do you think are going to be the biggest changes to how organizations function in this new decade? So the big changes that we're going to see over the next 10 years, we're already a few weeks in, and what role will technology play? I'm going to toss this one over first to Gillian. Gillian, it's all you.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going to see an increase in awareness of the importance of employee experience. When you think about generational and social shifts and how we use technology every day, I think the next generation of workers are really going to expect to see that consumer technology that they're used to automatically part of the workplace. And I also say we're going to see a continuing trend towards more remote work and the expectation and the ability to work from anywhere. So organizations are going to need to work on providing a constant user experience to employees, regardless of their work environment. I mean, I personally have worked in a global distributed team for over 20 years, and a firm believer that the person best suited to a job or a role may not necessarily be sitting beside you. So I'm hoping advances in technology such as automatic language translation will really open up opportunities to leverage talent globally and create those more diverse workforces. And we think about the future of AI and how we can augment our digital workers, how we can help automate repetitive tasks and really connect our workers together. And as I say, the employees' expectations of technology is only going to increase. They're going to expect those personalised and contextualised enhancements to be available within the workplace. And really, organisations really need to think about a strategy to deliver that for the next generation of workers.
I'm sure, Gillian, a lot of folks will be happy to see that you think it's AI is going to help with contextually with relevant content versus replacing workers. That's a good thing to hear and see.
Yes, definitely, and we'll touch upon that later. Where we see AI. So I think some of that is really around expectations of what artificial intelligence can do today, and pragmatic uses. I don't think we're going to have that robot sitting beside us in the next few years. So, it really is about how we can use artificial intelligence, machine learning to really help our workers, and as I say, automate some of those simpler tasks.
So happy you brought that up. As a reporter for CMSWire, AI, and it's easy to say, the workers just want to get their work done. They don't care what technologies are going to enable with them. Well, guess what? My number one story as a reporter this year was how AI is helping enable human resources. So there are eyeballs all over that. So good stuff, Gillian. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on AI. Same question. Want to kick things over to John. John, biggest changes next decade, and how's technology going to fit in here?
Thanks, Dom. Good to talk to you again. And so firstly, I do agree with Gillian. All of that, particularly the impact of AI. And yes, as an HR consultant, that is absolutely something that I'm seeing a lot of. And sorry to agree, by the way. I'm sure that as we warm up, as the webinar continues, that we'll start to disagree with each other a little bit more as well. The question is about how organisations change, and particularly coming from HR and also OD, organisation design. I do think it's an important context to recognise that the organisations that we're working in are changing very broadly as well. A lot of focus on purpose, moving towards greater sustainability, and the people stakeholder group in particular. I'm working with a lot of organisations becoming truly people-centric, or more human-centric, and putting the people at the centre of what they're about. And of course, the people are changing with a move to different workforce categories and contingent workers and so on. I think relationships are becoming much more important. So a lot of my work these days, my recent book, The Social Organisation, all about investing not just in the people themselves, but the connections, the relationships, the conversations, or the social capital between the people as well. What else? Investment in fixed assets going down. So perhaps the physical workplace becoming less important or more flexible. And the structure of organisations changing as well. So building on hierarchical functions, which personally I don't think are ever going to go away, but adding to those in terms of communities, networks, project teams, particularly agile teams as well. So lots of changes in the rest of the organisation. And I think that's important because I also think that what we do in technology, and particularly the digital workplace, needs to respond to and align with all of those other broader changes. So if people are becoming more people-centric, the digital workplace also becomes more important. But we also need to think about how we respond to all of those different stakeholder groups. We need to respond to the growing importance of relationships and think about how we use the digital workplace to help people connect across the organisation. We need to think about how we fill the hole that perhaps the declining importance of the physical workplace is leaving and take more of the weight that used to take itself. And in terms of structures, and this is one of my key perspectives in this whole agenda, that we need to see the digital workplace as part of an organizational model and ensure that our workplace aligns with all of those other elements of the organization. So, for example, if we're focused on agile teams, our digital workplace needs to emphasize sharing within a team, sort of the synchronous chat functionality, those sort of things. So, the technology changes is really, really exciting, but I still think the organizational context is, if anything, even more important.
Excellent, John. Thank you for that. And spot on with the timing. We're doing really well in our goals here, so thank you for that. And, it's funny, as a remote worker myself, I've been remote since 2012. And I got to tell you, I haven't really felt many changes from 2012 to 2020. I've been able to do my work just fine. So then again, I don't have these massive infrastructure and IT needs. I'm just a reporter who files a story. But it's amazing to think how much things are going to change in relevant context to AI. It's going to be exciting for sure. Thank you so much for that, John. Hey, let's go to question number 2. How about that? So the question is, as remote work, speaking of remote work, as it becomes more and more the norm, like I said, 2012, I haven't left my kitchen. How will organizations adapt to support that and continue to have a sense of corporate community? What a great question. How does someone like me have a sense of corporate community from my kitchen? Sharon, let's start with you on that. Sharon O'Dea, thanks for joining us, by the way. Here's your debut question for the webinar, Sharon. It's all yours.
This is a great question. So remote work, I'm also working from my kitchen right now. I've worked for a number of kitchens over the last decade or so. The remote work, because it's one of the areas where when we talk about the future of work, we're actually talking about an interplay between what's happening with technology, but also what's happening in broader society. And that's everything from an aging population to the changing, property market that means people live further from their workplace than maybe they did before. But the technology is really enabling us to feel much more connected. If you think about the tools we used back in 2012 were pretty clunky, particularly if you were trying to do something by video, that now they're really innate, they're really ingrained into the way that we get things done. But remote work isn't simply about the technology. It has to be much more around how do we enable organizations to work effectively when they are distributed. We're starting to see more and more organizations becoming remote first, but that's not simply about giving people the tools, but actually thinking about how those tools are used, thinking about looking at the actual user needs and the processes that are used so that we can not just recreate the tasks that we do now, but almost reinvent the way that work gets done. Going back to John's point around how do we tap into those conversations? How do we ensure that those are kind of valid work artifacts? So the tools that enable us to work remotely are getting better all the time. If that I can quickly switch on, say, a Zoom chat or whatever. But actually, how do we then enable people to feel connected to the organization? So I've read some stats recently that something like half of all kind of knowledge workers will be working remotely within the next 10 years. And I've noticed a definite shift over the last perhaps 2 to 3 years, where people used to, do a day a week at home. It's almost the balance has shifted, so they do a day a week in the office. And again, back to John's point, what does that mean for the future of the office? But actually, we need to think about management and training as well. How do we support managers to work with remote teams? I know I've worked with some clients over the last year, or a couple of years, where we've really had to think about actually everything right from the language that we use. Do we have a 2-tier workforce? Do we refer to people who work at the headquarters versus people working remotely? Actually, some organizations are starting to switch that around and think, actually, why don't we focus on the activity and not the place that it's being done? I'm working from home. I'm working from the London office. I'm working from my kitchen here in Amsterdam. Another area I think is quite interesting is how do we recreate that the tacit learning that you get So when you work in an office, often you'll overhear the person next to you and then say, you'll understand how they get things done. You can ask them questions. You absorb things even without really realizing it. How do we make sure that people are able to do that at distance and at scale? So I think there's lots of questions that we haven't quite bottomed out. We've started to, the tools, I think, enable us to do them. We now really need to address a lot of those cultural questions and process questions, I think.
Sharon, I love your points on culture. It's so key. You know, at my company, I feel the culture, even though I'm a remote worker. I can pop into the office in San Francisco and feel like I just pick up the conversation, and that starts at the top, which segues into Brett. Brett, you're seeing this from all kinds of angles because, you know, your company produces the technology that enables this, but also you're a CEO. You know, you want to establish culture there. So tell me, Brett Caldon, what's your thoughts on this? You might be on mute there, Brett.
I am, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with the cultural thing entirely. I think that's really where it has to start, and that's an evolution. Like Sharon said, we've seen it already. We're seeing it in the studies, the reports from large companies like Forbes and such, and what the predictive modeling is of either, you know, the non-desk workers or the you know, flexible workplace arrangement things that are happening in enterprises now are driving that. But if you don't have that cultural, and that comes down from the top as well, around, you know, the sense of community and being, like you said, when you step into the San Francisco office, having that be the same as working from home or in the connected world, using the technologies that we have today. It was a good point too to think about, you know, as we move forward, as we become, I guess, more independent in the aspect of not being in an office, to the impact, and the impact that was mentioned around just what is an office going forward, but also the institutional knowledge piece of that. You know, that's a critical component of sort of you know, user experience, employee experience, and how you either assimilate to a company or feel a part of a company. You know, when you can't turn around and ask somebody a question, or the water cooler is virtual, you know, there's different things that play into how you enable a larger, more horizontal employee experience based on what you would get from being in the office. And I think technology is going to play a massive role in that, and how you simplify those experiences. So I think what you're seeing now too is not only is it sort of, you know, work from home and the remote work aspect of it, it's not 9 to 5 anymore either. Right? I mean, you're starting to see, even you talked about the evolution of gig economy, and even in the enterprise, jobs aren't 9 to 5, and they're blending more and more with your personal life. So I think what you're going to see is sort of a blending going forward of what technologies allow you to kind of bring the whole you, if you will, between what's going on in your life and your work life together, because it's not going to be a structure going forward. We've seen also, you know, the evolution of flexible workspace as an address list, where a lot of no-name seating type things happening, which is going to drive even more of the, you know, confluence between, you know, IoT type capabilities of the physical workspace for those who are in the physical workspace, but also having that seamless for if you're remote. So you're going to see, again, you know, you've seen the evolution of nameless desks, where you're signing up for the rotational spots here and there because you don't have a permanent desk because of the nature of the way the organization's changing. So we're going to see some really cool stuff that happen there, and I'm really excited to look into the future of the technologies. I know we'll talk about AI a bit, but already advancements in the augmented reality pieces that can bring some of that community and continuity together for folks who are working remote, for those who aren't, or, you know, anywhere in a distributed workforce.
Thank you, Brett. You know, great points about making sure you understand your frontline workers. You know, do your research. It actually makes me think of a question for the end. If I have time to pop into the Q&A, I will. About voice of the employee. You know, a lot of people talk about voice of the customer on the marketing and customer experience side of things. I would love to hear more about voice of the employee and how organizations can enable that. But I do want to give the final word on this question, number 2, to John Ingham. John, for remote work, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. So again, agree with everything that's been said, the importance of culture. Personally, I tend to focus on social capital rather than culture. I find it a more useful area to focus. So trying to understand what we're trying to create in terms of the connections, relationships, conversations, and then designing for that. But it's a similar type of approach. I think it's, in a sense, is a bigger issue. I mean, I agree the move towards remote workers is important. I'm actually in our family room today, but I normally work in the kitchen as well. So, you know, I'm another example of that sort of shift. But you've got a lot going on. You've got the extension into new workforce categories, including contingent workers and different categories of contingent workers. You've got the whole shift towards flexible working. Different generations, different nations. There's so much change in our workforce. And we need to take account of all of those sort of things. So I do think remote work is important, but perhaps let's extend that agenda. I loved Sharon's suggestion around sort of designing for digital first, avoiding the sort of two-tier workforce. I think that's really important. Again, I think we can do that across the whole organisation, not just through the technology, which I guess links to that cultural point. And to me, it's really, really going to town on things like purpose, relatedness, belonging, and trying deliberately to build the sort of organisation where people will feel, compelled to work rather than struggling to get out of bed every morning because they don't really want to go in. And a lot of that is really simple. Things like social clubs, just to get people together to talk about non-work things, I think are really useful. Not very strategic, but very effective. The last organisation design project I was doing, we'd be moving people all around the building. And the simplest thing I did during about a 3-month period, but probably one of the most effective, or the one that people always talk to me about, is we put people's photos up by the lift, so that if people were working on a different floor and went to see a different place, they'd know who the people around them would be. So very simple things, and they can be extended to the digital workplace, those type of approaches as well. I do think building a sense of community across a whole organisation, if it's a big organisation, is a really big ask. So the other thing that I would try to add to that, and builds on one of the points I made in the last question, is also using smaller communities inside the organisation. A community of sort of 50 people, you can really develop a deep sense of community. And if you've got numbers of communities, then that will spread and provide a feel of community across the whole organisation. And I do think that communities within sort of online social networking systems, for example, help. But I think it's more than that. I think it's about ensuring that communities are resourced and supported and are seen as an important part of the organisation. I mean, it is also one of the things that HR is doing some really good work on. So things like employee resource groups, for example, getting people from different minority groups together to share their issues, to take their needs to the rest of the organisation. And there's a lot of good learning about how to do that sort of thing. And it can be extended really, really simply into things like a community or ERG type group for remote workers. It's exactly the same principles, getting them together, supporting each other, sharing their perspectives across the organisation. A really, really important issue, and I do think the digital workplace is really helping us. And actually, just 30 seconds. One of the other things I do a lot on is sort of organisation development interventions across the whole organisation. So bringing people together physically to perhaps solve a problem or something, but also to develop their relationships and, again, develop that sense of community. And it's a really vital thing to do. But again, if you can get people having that sort of conversation within a digital workplace, it's like doing one of those facilitated sessions every day of the week. So the digital workplace is a huge, huge enabler for organisation development and organisation effectiveness. And I think sometimes we don't push that agenda. We don't use the workplace as much as perhaps we should do.
Excellent, John. Thanks for that very much. Sharon, you wanted to weigh in on one brief point before we move on to Q3.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the things I think we really need to address in all of this is actually traditionally, we have looked at how we provide tools and how we support workers just by the task they do. But I think in future, we need to take much more of a kind of user research, user needs approach and think about things like what stage of a career someone is in, so that when we are supporting fully remote workforces, potentially who have been remote since the beginning of their career, and certainly they may be remote with you for the entire time that they work with you, that we really understand the kind of full picture of how those people work. So instead of thinking, that person is a remote worker, therefore all remote workers need the same thing, early career workers who are remote often need very different support structures, tools, communities, and those who are experienced professionals. So I guess what I'm meaning to with this is, if we're going to make remote work, and I think we have to in the future of work, we need to take a much bigger focus on truly understanding user needs and taking a much more nuanced picture on what those are, rather than lumping people in around the kind of work that they do.
Excellent, Sharon. Thanks for those final thoughts. Moving on to Q3 of 6. This is an interesting one. We also cover marketing experiences at CMSWire, and they haven't even figured that one out. So this is going to be a huge challenge this decade. So the question is, how will organizations tackle the challenge of creating personalized digital experiences for each employee? How about we go to Gillian to start that one. Gillian?
Yeah, I think this falls on from what Sharon is saying. It's really understanding the user, as in the user is your employee, as an individual, not as their job role or their remote worker or they're a manager. Like, those things play into the experience, and like the first step really is understanding like personas like that to see how you can improve your digital workplace experience. But to really provide that personalized experience, you really need to be thinking about the data that you have to understand them better, like who they are, their needs and their context in each moment. And it's quite a hard thing to do. So I just want to sort of give a bit of an example. Like, we talk about personas, but that's really quite static information. You really need to be more dynamic and have contextual information at the point in time that, say, your employee is asking a question. So chatbots in HR, chatbots in employee workspace, there's proliferation of chatbots, and there's a bit of a hype and they're not really working. But when you think about it, if we take an example of employee chatbot and you ask about an expense limit for daily expenses or per diem, like, context is key in that conversation. If you ask the person, think about all the implied questions, assumed knowledge that they have to give you the correct answer. So things like, who is asking? Well, it's me, Gillian. What office location I am? Well, I'm in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Well, where's my current location? Actually, I've travelled to visit Brett in Boston, so I'm not in my normal place. My job role, potentially there's limits based on grade. Have we talked about this before? Why would I say the same thing I said 2 minutes ago? Is there follow-up questions or follow-up systems I might recommend? Or maybe you should look at Concur, or maybe you should do this. So that's the type of contextual information in the moment that we really try to bring to WorkGrid. And one of the, a simple goal we do have is that when you ask a question, employee asks a question, we have the right answer, but that could be the answer for me and not the answer for the person beside me, because I am an individual. And it really is about understanding my needs at that time, as Sharon was saying. And that can be quite hard to achieve. And obviously it's the continued improvement in areas of artificial intelligence like natural language processing that really helps understand that, but also machine learning to really understand patterns of usage and really help at that time I have the question to get the right answer. So I am very technology focused. That is my role. So I always think ahead. I'm always looking at what's happening in research around AI. Is there going to be a concept such as personalized artificial intelligence? There is research at the moment about how to compress really large scale models that run in the cloud today. Are we able to deliver them on personal devices? Are we actually going to have personalized machine learning models that are, specific to me? Now that is, I know we're talking about the future in a couple of questions, but that's the type of things that I think about, is how we can use technology to really deliver that experience that we all want.
Gillian, thank you very much for that. Personalized digital experiences for employees, John. That's a mouthful. That's a big task. Big task for an organization. Where do they start? How do they get it done?
It is a big task. Firstly, I'd suggest, so I loved Gillian's point around individuals. I do think that is important. If we only think about a person as an employee, when we think about their experience, it's not going to be as effective and holistic enough. Whenever HR talks about candidates or learners, or IT talk about users, or my favourite of all is when property talk about seats, meaning people. Which I'm sure doesn't go down very well in the workforce. Let's talk about people, particularly when we're talking about their experience. And if we can, and I know the digital experience will perhaps be the only experience that people have if they're working remotely, but for most people in the office, it is the broader experience, and the digital experience is part of that. So the more we can think about that full rounded experience, I think the more opportunity we have to respond to people's individual needs. Again, I think we can do that outside the technology. So that sort of move towards customization that's been going on for some time, I think, is really important. In fact, just going back to Sharon's point about people at different stages in their careers, I did a project end of last year on performance management, looking at segmenting and differentiating the approach according to how long someone had been inside an organization, the different roles they were working on, and their different propensity to invest in their own development as well. So that sort of move towards different nuanced approaches, I think, is really important. But outside the technology, it's difficult to do much more. You can customize, but you can't really personalize to an individual. So I do think that is a unique opportunity to use the digital workplace and the data that's available, the use of algorithms, increasingly AI, to learn about the way that individuals are interfacing with the organization and deliver something to them that is truly personalized. It's hugely important. And again, I think that first place to start is just thinking about that full experience from the individual's perspective.
It's all about getting to the Netflix of the workplace, right, John?
That would be good.
Dom DeCastro, we recommend that you look at your company's vacation policy. You never know. Maybe we'll get to that point. It's exciting to wait. Thank you guys for that. So, hey, halfway through, question 3 done. Moving on to question 4. But before we do, I just want to give Brett one more chance to add some comments on question 3 there about personalized digital experience. Brett, what say you?
Yeah, it's not less about the personalization. I just want to add to that a little bit. The personalization is going to be key for the context and, providing that experience to the employee, but it's also going to be the abstraction and kind of removing friction. Because you're going to have personalization across all these silos within the organization. And you see that today. The employees have to deal with upwards of tens and 20s of systems just to get their work done. So I think that adding the personalization and taking advantage of the data, but also taking those moments that you find across that horizontal in the enterprise where you're saving employees, whether it's an engagement experience or saving them time and productivity, but unifying the experience is something that's intuitive, personalized, and easy. I think the combination of all that is really where you're going to start seeing things happen over the next 10 years with the evolution of what they're calling like employee experience layers. And even you're seeing it in organizations now where they're creating roles in organizations within enterprises at work that are focused on chief employee experience officer, chief happiness officer. So it's really going to be a movement to rein in the more horizontal experience for the employee that touches the 360 of their day, but leveraging, again, the personalization across the board.
Thanks for the ad, Brett. Much appreciated. All right, let's go to Q4. What do you think will be the biggest and best use cases of AI in the workplace in this new decade? So practical application of AI, biggest, best. How are we going to get it done? I'm going to start with Sharon on that one.
Oh, just taking myself off mute there. So we know that these technologies often have a bit of a lag getting into the workplace, but I actually think we're starting to see them become everyday tools that we're all starting to just be incorporated into the tools that we use every day, which is great to see. So I'm on the industry body for communicators in the UK, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. We've got an AI in PR panel. So we're actually looking at the role that AI is playing within the communications industry, for instance. What we did there was do a study and ask communicators to say where they're already using AI in a limited sense as part of their communications role, which was really interesting. But we also asked people to forecast where they think it's going to go in 5 years' time. What was interesting there is there was a lot of consensus around it starting to replace the things that we're doing with analysis, forecasting, measurement, ultimately the things that we're just not very good at as humans, and passing huge volumes of data. And that allows us to get on with the things that we'd much rather be doing. We can start to extrapolate that across other use cases in the workplace. There are things that are, quite frankly, beneath us, things like transcribing, taking notes. Why do I need to touch 6 different systems to book a meeting room or find out when 3 different people are free and book a room? So those are things that are already common in the workplace, but I think they will be a little bit, I think it will take probably until the middle of the decade for them to be really ingrained into the way that we get things done. So I think it's really about making us more effective rather than robots taking our jobs. It can augment our skills, but enable us to get on with those things that we are much better at doing as human beings, things that require empathy, creativity, and so forth. But by taking on a lot of that heavy lifting, it enables us to sort of simplify, streamline the user experience in the workplace. So for me, I guess the biggest 3 trends will be bringing together things in the context in which we need them, to streamline and simplify the workplace, and to get rid of a lot of the grunt work that, frankly, we wouldn't want to do with our day anyway.
Excellent. Sharon, thank you very much. Gillian, why don't you weigh in on that one? I know you're very invested in this arena for sure in your role with WorkGrid.
Yes, so I actually agree with a lot of points there. So, I mean, I think we're coming out a bit of a hype cycle around artificial intelligence. And I think in the next few years, we're just going to see a more pragmatic and realistic expectation of what can be achieved. And like you see, some things like, artificial intelligence maybe talked about more as augmented intelligence over the next few years, because human intelligence is far superior. But yes, we can train the machines in narrow domains to be more productive. Like, you talked about the translation, the transcription, the note-taking. And really the aim of that is to reduce the time spent on those specific tasks, because, we are more valuable. We have other things that we can do. And like I said, I call that practical or everyday AI. And we start to see it, like, you see suggested responses to emails, or there's just wee small things. But you're going to see gradually more and more products are going to have that type of capability built in. And really the 3 areas of artificial intelligence, which is a massive field, I think we'll see things in computer vision, conversational AI, and machine learning. Will really start to improve that employee experience. So to bring that down a wee bit more into the subfields and, the types of products you might see. So speech recognition, the natural language understanding. We're thinking the conversational agents, the chatbots, question answering and document comprehension. Search is not solved. How artificial intelligence and machine learning can be applied to the search domain is really interesting to me. Because actually what we're talking about there is machines understanding human language, understanding, and extracting data out of documents, being able to, instead of giving you a link to the policy, actually reading the policy and extracting out the paragraph or sentence that gives you that answer. So we're seeing a lot of those more productive or productivity sort of gains, and they're small things, instead of spending like 5 minutes trying to find that thing on the internet, the chatbot with the magic search finds it in seconds, and you add that up across your day. It's really about, it's not about the robot beside you, as I said before. It's about augmenting, the human intelligence that we all have. And really what we're seeing is the increased power of the research, open source research in things like NLP, and also the compute power, even on your mobile device, is just getting more and more. So, we're able to bring that sort of technology that maybe used to sit in a research lab 10 years ago into the workplace. And then we talk about machine learning and predictions, and being able to actually understand more based on patterns of use, and the knowledge, as I say, the personalized knowledge of the employee as an individual, and make suggestions and be proactive. I think proactive assistance is definitely something we're going to see a lot more of. But just something we have to think about is, as we bring this type of technology into the workplace, and the people like ourselves who design applications around that, is product design itself needs to change. We need to think about how to bring things like voice and multimodal and interactive capabilities into the things that we deliver into the workplace. And to go back to one of the initial points is, your employees are going to start to expect that, because they're used to talking to machines, But generally, I do see the trends say it is, I just call it everyday AI. But there is things, I think, scale AI into a product. It's not just a research thing or a toy, but it's used by millions. That actually changes engineering itself and how we build some of these things. And I also think it's really important is, like we talk about machine learning and supervised machine learning using historical data. Is there bias in that historical data? Is the models that we're going to build actually going to, keep societal bias within that? So I think there are general points around AI, not so much digital workplace, but just in general. I think we're going to more focus on that, on ethics, on policy, and regulation potentially.
Sweet. And John, you wanted to add in a little bit about how AI is going to impact HR, human resources. Go ahead.
Well, just because you made the point earlier, Dom, that it is clearly a very topical area at the moment. But it's really that point that Gillian just made. The key one for HR is about bias. It's very difficult. It's impossible to be unbiased as a human. AI clearly finds it difficult at the moment as well. And I'm sure everyone's heard of some of the cases where attempts to reduce bias through AI have not worked. But there are things we can do to reduce bias in humans in terms of assessment, learning, behavioural nudges, those sort of things. But it's difficult to do that much. Whereas I think currently it's more difficult to remove bias from AI, but it's possible to do. So when we get to the point that we can do that, we can hopefully make totally or very near unbiased decisions, which humans are never going to be able to do. So there is a unique sweet spot for AI there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for that addition. And let's move on to the next one, winding down here. A couple more questions to go before we get into Q&A. I'll start with Brett on this one. What does the future of the internet look like in the next 3, 5, 10 years? Heck, let's throw in 7 years. Why not, Brett, right? How will they even exist in a decade? What do you think?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about, our internet's dead, and the answer is no, they're not. Right? I think what you're going to see is a continuation of what's happening now. We've seen industry trends going from real internet-driven societies to now digital workplace societies. So the view of what that capability is broadening for employees. When you started the early internet days, it was about knowledge management. It was about information, taxonomy of documents, finding things out about the company and things like that. The rise of social and mobile and all the other capabilities of KPI enterprises really turned that a little upside down, and I think that's where the progression is going to continue to go. They're not going to be just this portal application-driven experience anymore. It's going to be multi-channel. You're going to start to see the need to blend both productivity, the personalization aspects, with knowledge, and not just a communications tool. It's really going to, I think, evolve into a team sport, if you will, from an industry perspective, that is going to go horizontally across the organization, and really going to start evolving into apps that are about engagement, not just the knowledge piece of it as well, but like I said, productivity and bringing together experiences across the organization, and not the singly thing is it's just an internet. The internet to me is like the old portal experience for the employees. It's much broader. You're going to have the artificial intelligence channels like the AI for chatbot and things like that. Integrated as all options, and also going to be much more diverse as you push out into other places where people do their work. And that's really what it's going to be about, bringing the work to where the person is more, less about sort of a centralized portal, but still an important piece of the experience.
Yeah, it's crazy how strong the intranet branding has been, right, throughout the years. I mean, we're all trying to push digital workplace, strategies, best practices, technology providers like Workgrid. And then many people say, digital workplace, you mean the intranet, right? It's such a powerful branding in the digital workplace for sure. Sharon, I want to give you some thoughts on this question before we move on to our final one.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've been working in the internet space now for about 15 years, and I guess to paraphrase Mark Twain, rumors of the internet's death have been greatly exaggerated. I think for the entire time I've worked in that field, people have said internets are going away, and they haven't. My expectation is very much like websites. 10 years ago, people said, we don't need a website, we've got a Facebook page. You do need a website. Actually, there is still a need for people to be able to go to a trusted place where they know that they've got an official version of the information they need to do their job, whether that's a policy or whatever else it may be, or to signpost them to services. Those need to get a lot smarter and more contextual, bring together tools from across the myriad systems that we touched all day. Probably with my cynical hat on, I would say that because enterprise projects are pretty slow to get off the ground, not only will internet still be around in 10 years, I would put money on many of them being exactly the same intranets you have today. And that's a problem because actually the workforce is changing really fast. So the World Economic Forum have reduced their future of work forecast down. They used to forecast things 10 or 20 years hence. They've shrunk those down to 5 years now. If your enterprise project takes 3 to 5 years, which they do in, say, a bank, then you're already a long way behind what your workforce need. So the internet's not dying. It's probably not evolving as fast as it really needs to keep up with the demands of a changing workforce.
Sweet. Brett, a quick follow-up on that?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I totally agree. Is when you start looking at the evolution of the internet and the time span, which is why it's important. I think what you're going to see over the next few years is defining what that future-proof technology approach is that allows you to be very agile and plug and play and make pivotal changes as you progress, because things are going to be changing much faster than they ever have.
Wonderful. All right. One more question for our panelists before we ask them more questions later on at the end, the last 10 minutes or so. But it's going to be from you folks, the audience. So we'll show you how to, once again, get into that Q&A queue in just a moment. But let's take about a minute or so each, guys. Rapid fire here. Get out your crystal balls. Pass the crystal ball around, digitally, of course. When we meet 10 years from now, when we have this webinar with CMSWire and Workgrid in 2030, that's a real year? That's really going to happen? That is nuts. What's the next big trend we'll be talking about that will transform the workplace? I'm going to just go on a limb and make my prediction. It's going to be the same thing. People are going to be struggling with document management in 10 years. That won't go away. But let's go with Sharon on this one. Crystal ball, Sharon, 2030. What do you got?
Just coming off mute again. I guess mine is as much a hope as a prediction, but I would like to think that in 10 years' time, organizations will start to, or enterprise and digital workplace technology will stop being the poor cousin of external digital. Organizations will start giving it the same degree of planning, discovery, and applying the same standards of design in response to I guess, vastly improved or raised employee expectations. So I think we need to think about having the same processes of continuous iterative product improvement rather than the, big bang and slow decline that has characterized so many enterprise and particularly digital workplace projects over the years. So for me, it's that digital workplace will be much more of a product or a series of products. Maybe we'll start talking about the workplace web rather than the digital workplace and make it more of an ecosystem of tools with the same kind of demands and quality that you would get from external tools.
Thank you, Sharon. John, 2030.
Yes, so this is the point that I get to disagree with everybody, or perhaps to disagree with the premise of the question anyway. And again, it's a hope rather than a prediction, really. I hope that in 10 years' time, we won't be talking about trends anymore. Trends aren't important. What matters is understanding the context, yes, and the context changes, but what's important is about understanding our own response to that context, particularly because people, as I was saying right at the beginning, are becoming more important. to take the full opportunity to provide competitive advantage through what we do in our people, we need to differentiate. We need to do things differently rather than the same. Let's stop copying everybody else, following the trends. Let's work out what smart, strategic development, use of a digital workplace needs for ourselves, and then let's do that. So in 10 years' time, I'm hoping we're going to be talking much more about that. But very happy to come on the webinar again then. Look forward to it.
All right, and moving on to the WorkGrid folks, we can start with Brett on this one. 10 years from now, Brett, what do you got?
I honestly think it's going to be a lot of the same. I mean, I think the things we're talking about now, even what we talked about 10 years ago, should really be still focused on how do you make work better, right? We're going to see things change continually, and the technology is going to change. I mean, I'm looking forward to the day when you see what Microsoft HoloLens and things like that are doing, and how that'll change sort of how you connect at work, remote, and those type of things. So I think it's going to naturally just keep continuing, on the pace we're going as far as change goes. But I think the intent is going to remain the same. And I think the intent as we go through this is all about how do we make our employers more engaged, more productive, better work environments, and things like that. So, when I look 10 years out, I don't know. The crystal ball isn't showing me sort of what those key technology components are that come, but I can guarantee it's probably going to be associated very highly with data and probably more democratization of data across things that make things easier for people when you start talking about how you learn and do things like behavioral patterning and proactive assistance. So I think that's going to continue. And I think, again, no sure shot answer to this, not knowing what those advancements are going to be. But I think the intent is going to be the same as it is today.
And lastly, Gillian McCann from WorkGrid taking us to the final thoughts on our panelist Q&A. What do you got, Gillian?
So obviously we'll be talking about where to park the flying cars because it's 10 years in the future. But no, so my personal hope and a big interest of mine is voice interfaces and how we actually interact with computers and machines. Voice is the most natural interface that we have. And I think it solves a lot of accessibility and digital literacy issues. If we are able to converse with a machine and a machine can understand what we want to do, I just think that is a very joyful experience, and it is a personal interest. And I'd love to see like a personalized network of assistants who work in small, narrow domains, working together to help me in my daily work. What's important to me, yeah. So that's my thing, voice. Voice is the future, and we will build voice-first systems.
Well, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts. We're not going to let you go anywhere, though, because we're going to collect some more thoughts with our Q&A from the audience. So thank you. Let's tell our folks how to do that once again. Just use that Q&A module right at the bottom left of your browser at any time to submit a question. And you see all those Twitter handles. You can keep the conversation going, post webinar, tweet to us anytime. And we thank you for listening, as always, of course. So let's go into the Q&A to wrap things up for the final 8 or so minutes. First question is, what are some ways organizations can modernize the intranet and make it a more useful tool for employees? I'm going to take a guess and say, Sharon, you might have some thoughts in this arena. Sharon, how can you modernize that intranet? Just make it more useful.
Actually, my stock answer is usually to throw it away and start again. That actually, intranets over the traditionally, or ones that I work with, they often bloat over time, and it means they lose a lot of focus on what they are genuinely intended to do. So quite often, every bit of information on there makes it slightly harder to find the thing that you actually wanted to do. There's quite a lot of, there's this really strong case sometimes for genuinely scrapping it and starting again. If that's not actually the case, then search is the thing that people need in order to make it more useful. So spend some actual time and money on search, and people will thank you for it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Our next question, I'm going to kick this over to Gillian. We have a really niche question here for a vertical, which I love. What can the K-12, the K through 12, the primary, secondary educational platform arena do in order to transition in this rapid movement? What a question. An old institution, an old vertical. So what can they do to take advantage of this rapid movement with things like AI, machine learning, the cloud? What do you think, Gillian?
So I'm answering the question in the context of improving the educational experience for children, maybe. So this is my opinion about, I think we should expose children to technology a lot earlier, a lot more hands-on. As we think about the secondary education, so like I think K-12 is an American construct. We have primary, secondary education here. Just more with cloud, there is a democratization of AI. Simple things like Alexa and Alexa Blueprint, which is a no-code capability that you can actually bring voice interfaces into the home, and you allow children to experiment with what technology can do. So, I think the cloud has enabled that. And the concept of a citizen developer, is no-code, low-code solutions is really exposing children of all ages to those type of capabilities. And I think it helps them, see the big picture or maybe understand what they could do. I personally think our education system needs to completely change to be less learning by rote and passing exams, but to actually deliver real experiences. We're talking about the new generation, or the new generation really understanding what is capable with technology, and are we teaching them to think bigger? I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, thank you for the answer. Very much so. Now, let's move on to Brett, a question based off things we discussed in the panel about personalized digital experiences, for every single employee, one-to-one for employees. That sounds expensive and time-consuming, according to the question. And how are organizations supposed to overcome those massive hurdles?
Yeah, I look at it like this. It's, you don't want to boil the ocean. When you start talking about personalization, it can be an incremental journey, but there's things out there already. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, certainly as it relates to being an engine that allows you to actually take advantage of the data you have about your employees. And you can start there. I think we talked a little bit as it goes forward, the transition to agile development and the mindsets and even the more design thinking approaches to delivering those personalized things based on intent in the organization and some of those, it's incremental. So, when you want to start about really looking and listening to your employees, you find the pain points that are really bothering them, the things that are going to have really quick value and high volume, you can start there because the journey doesn't stop. So, I would say expenses isn't necessarily the thing to take out of the mix. The real focus should be on, delivering value, delivering quick, the high value soon, and then compounding that as you go forward. And you have some, you do have some control over that.
All right, Dominic Castro here from CMSWire, leading the Q&A with our panelists down the stretch here, about 3 minutes to go. John, this question will be for you. How do these discussion points impact the role of the workplace platform owner in organizations? Like, for example, who should we be looking for? What should they be doing? What are your thoughts there, John?
So I think they do impact them. So things like designing for digital first, or for the remote worker first. If we have a big remote working population and we want our digital workplace to respond to them, why don't we get someone who's working digital to actually own the thing or to manage the community? Because then that's going to be easier for them to put themselves in their users' shoes. The other thing, particularly in this area, I think there's often some confusion or conflict or sort of misunderstanding about where does the workplace begin? Is it where does it exist? Is it communications, HR, IT, digital? Who is the owner? And I think that goes back to my initial points on the organisation. We need to get away from functions. The issue is that we're trying to give responsibility to a function. We need to start looking at project teams, communities, those sort of things. Let's get a community of communication, HR, IT, digital, other functions together to actually do this thing together. That's always going to be more effective, particularly if we're focused on collaboration. You know, collaborative approaches need collaboration to support them.
All right, cool. Let's kick the next question over to Sharon. We have a few minutes left. Sharon, this probably will be the last question. We got about a minute to go. So what steps should be, you know, or better said, what steps should my company be taking to engage frontline workers? Sharon?
I would say that it really depends who those frontline workers are. So I think the first thing that you should be doing is really developing a deep understanding of their user needs, because so much of what we see on things like Internets and digital workplace channels is focused on kind of the plumbing. How do we make sure it gets to where people are? But actually, I always think about it, you know, if you watch any kind of cop shows, when they want to identify who murdered the victim there, they always look at three things: means, motive, and opportunity. Actually, we need to look at, for our frontline workers, do they have the means? So is that, you know, do they have a device that enables them to access the tools that we need, or to access your communications? The opportunities, do they have time in their day? And if not, how do we change what we offer so that it fits into the windows they have? But I think critically, we also need to look at that last thing, which is motive. Is what you're offering them something that actually people would go out of their way to read? So actually, when we're addressing frontline workers, I think we really need to you know, have a think about Columbo or Miss Marple. And actually, are we addressing all three of those things? And if we're not, then frontline workers are not going to access your engagement and communications.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That is a lot to unpack. Thank you so much for taking the time. To our panelists and our listeners, of course, thank you for the questions. Just a couple of reminders. The webinar has been recorded, so a link to the on-demand video will be emailed to you in a few business days. Wait for that. And thanks to our panelists, Sharon O'Dea, John Ingham, Brett Caldon, Gillian, McCann, for speaking, and, of course, WorkGrid for sponsoring today's event. If your company is interested in sponsoring a webinar just like this one, hey, give us a shout. Webinars@CMSWire.com. This is Don McCastro signing off for CMSWire. Thank you, WorkGrid. See you guys soon.